Reflected light meters measure the intensity of light reflected from a chosen subject or subject area. The built-in meters on cameras are reflected light meters, on DSLR, on mirrorless, on point and shoot, and on cell phone cameras. The meter is set to treat the middle value of light it measures as middle gray. Exposure meters assume that the highlights, middle values, and shadows of scenes reflect 18% of the light that hits the scene. And that means the meter assumes the scene's values average out to middle gray. This works well when the scene's light do indeed average out to middle gray. Not so well when they don't. Reflected light meters measure the light reflected into the camera from a subject. These values in practice are perceived relative to one another. It's relatively easy for someone to pick out the difference between a darker and a lighter gray when the two are next to one another for comparison, or between a dark red and a medium red. But when there are many different values present in a single context, figuring out the relative darkness and lightness of all the values can be difficult, even for a photographer with a keen eye and a great deal of experience. Figuring out the range of light values in a complex site, or when you have to shoot quickly or on the move, can be quite daunting. That's one reason a meter can be an invaluable tool. In a scene with a very bright light, if you meter the brightest spot, it will be treated as middle gray by the meter, and the dark values will be off. The same thing happens with very dark subjects. If you meter the darkest spot, it will be treated as middle gray, and the brighter values will all be off. With handheld meters or meters with a single metering system, there are ways to compensate for the characteristic method of the meter. For instance, by inserting a neutral gray card into the scene to get a reading, or choosing a color in the environment like grass, which is similar to neutral gray, as a way to get a correct reading. Most cameras now allow you to choose a metering method according to the context you wish to photograph. The main problem with meters is they work smoothly when the subject scene is evenly lit. But when there are parts of the scene that have different light levels and intensities, especially extremes of light or dark, the meters often have difficulties. By default, some cameras look at average light levels in the entire frame, or more often, a selection of various regions of the frame, and try to come up with an exposure recommendation that balances the bright and dark parts of the image area, sometimes taking into account other factors, depending on the manufacturer making the camera. Most cameras, with the exception of some point and shoot and many cell phone cameras, now have reflected light meters with several metering modes. These modes determine how large of an area is used to calculate the recommended exposure and how the recommendation itself is calculated. One metering mode is called either matrix, which is Nikon's name, or evaluative, which is Canon's name. Another is center-weighted, as named by Icon, and center-weighted averaging, as named by Canon. Both use a method called spot metering, and Canon uses a variant on the spot metering, which is a larger spot in the middle, and that they call partial. Matrix, or evaluative in Canon's terminology, and some other manufacturers use the terms honeycomb or segment metering, works like this. The meter measures the light intensity in several regions of the scene and combines the results according to a method specific to the camera to determine the best results. The number of regions used varies widely and from camera to camera, unfortunately. Most of the variation in method has to do with how much priority is given to the autofocus point and how many zones are used. Experimentation can help, but it is often difficult to determine exactly how the camera reacts and why to various situations. This kind of metering happens to be the default mode on almost all cameras. The next metering method is called center-weighted metering. Canon's term is center-weighted average. Nikon just sticks with center-weighted. As the name implies, this form of metering is locked into an area in the center of the frame. It's extremely useful when there are drastically different values in the frame and you want to be sure one is exposed in a particular way. It doesn't orient toward the focus point, but evaluates only the middle area instead. Photographers often put the desired part of the image in the center, meter, and then recompose the frame, moving back to the original desired framing in which the subject is not in the center. This method is widely used for portraits. The next method is called spot metering, both by Nikon and Canon and many other manufacturers for that matter. Spot metering evaluates the light in a specific spot or point in the frame, centered on the focus point. On some cameras or with some lenses or in auto mode, spot metering occurs within a small circle in the center instead of a small circle centered on the current focus point. Canon has another form of metering called partial that measures a larger spot but essentially is a variation on spot metering. Spot metering is often used to shoot very high contrast scenes or scenes where the photographer wants to be sure that one particular part of the image has a particular dark or light value even though it's small or exceptional or extreme. For example, a piece of coal sitting in a snowdrift, or someone standing in the mouth of a cave surrounded by a sun-drenched rainforest canopy.